1816. Again, that's 1-888-622-1816.
All right, 24 minutes before 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. You would think from just the sheer size of this country that there are probably some places where the judicial system is not as good as other places, right?
Exactly.
So let's find out about this. Justice Jilted is the title of the segment. Tiger Joyce is on the phone. He's the president of the American Tort Reform Association. He's going to tell us which states need the most judicial reform and what can be done to ratify change in the court system. Tiger, it's an honor to have you on the show. Good morning. How are you?
I'm great, Larry. Thanks so much. Thanks to you and Robin for letting me be here with you.
Absolutely. And where are you calling from?
In Washington, D.C.
Oh, right at the heart of it, huh? How is the judicial system there?
Interesting, let's just say.
Yeah?
I love that.
I mean, and does it vary? I hate to ask it this way because it almost seems like an obvious answer, but do the rich get off easier than the not-so-rich?
Well, you know, when we look at the issues that we look at, the rich that we focus on are the people who are entrepreneurial in finding new ways to sue businesses. And you know, they seem to do quite well, pretty much wherever they seem to want to land.
You know, and I've thought about this sometimes. It seems like some people make their money by suing other people. Well, I mean, oh my gosh, I hate to tell you this one. This is just the heartbreaker. But that guy who killed the teenager here in Florida is suing the family for like $100 million. I guess you know what I'm talking about, right?
I'm generally familiar, but, you know, we're seeing cases, for example, you know, a little north of you in Georgia, where you had a carjacking in the parking lot of a Kroger grocery store, and, you know, the Kroger ended up being assessed nearly $70 million
What?
out of the $80 million reward in a carjacking.
Well,
You know, you would think that somebody who's committed one of the most egregious felonies would be the person responsible, but not when the litigation doesn't work properly.
I don't understand. It seems like a judge should know better than to allow something like that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, the technical legal issue there is it's considered foreseeable that something like that could happen. But, you know, I don't think you should hold other people responsible. No one, I don't think it's inconceivable ultimately that you can hold someone responsible for committing a felony.
Can I ask you to educate me on something? And I apologize to the whole world for not knowing what this word means, but I really don't know what the word tort means.
Well, you're not alone. You know, the simplest way to put it is, you know, if you enter into it's to contrast it with another area of the law, which is contracts, which is if you enter into an agreement with somebody, you write it out. It doesn't even necessarily need to be written out. That's a contract. That's an agreed upon relationship. A tort is a relationship where there's no agreement. It could be an auto accident. It could be, you know, that you know you're just out in public and you know you haul off and knock someone in the face. That's you know, that could be a crime, but it's also you know, would be recognized as a tort as well.
So would the reform mean that we are sticking to whatever the law says? Like if the law says I can't punch you in the face, well, there's no relationship or contract, but at the same time there's a law, right?
Well, there is. I mean, certainly it's, you know, that's where the law can be. You could have both a criminal case as well as a civil case, and you know, it's up to the, you know, the processes of each to work. But you know, a lot of what we focus on is just kind of the rules of the road. Here's an example. You know, we're seeing more and more lawsuits that are being brought by cities, counties, and towns over broader national or even international issues like climate change, or you know, you see the examples. I live in Montgomery County, Maryland, where the county is hiring personal injury lawyers to sue the companies for e-cigarettes, and you know, those are examples where, you know, I think you're getting very far afield from the purpose of resolving disputes and into broader public policy questions. So there are all kinds of issues, and we highlight a lot of them in our report.
Will there ever be a time when, if something is tried in a criminal court and the outcome isn't correct, they always go to civil court? Will there be a time if you can only try it in one court or the other?
Well, probably the best example I can think of, if you're old enough to remember, I certainly am, is the O.J. Simpson case. He was accused of murdering his wife. He was found not guilty. But there was an enormous award assessed against him in civil court, so it can happen. But that's unusual that you have a situation like that. What we focus on is litigation which is very entrepreneurial, where you have people simply ginning up lawsuits or figuring out ways to change the law so that you have an outcome like that Kroger case that I mentioned to you in Georgia.
The website is judicialhellholes.org. Tell me, I have a list in front of me that says the judicial hellholes in this country, and I'm happy to say that Florida's not on this list. That's almost hard to believe, actually. But what does that mean?
Well, a judicial hellhole is a place where we believe that equal justice under the law is just not available to civil litigants. These are the places that the personal injury lawyers choose. Now, you mentioned Florida. Florida 2 years ago was the #1 judicial hellhole. It's been on the report previously. I'm very pleased to say, and we acknowledge this in our report, that we've moved Florida to a different segment of the report because of some important positive changes that we've seen. A lot of credit goes to Governor DeSantis, who appointed some very strong members of the Florida Supreme Court. And as an example, the Florida Supreme Court has on its own motion adopted important rules with respect to something called expert evidence. Sounds kind of technical, but it basically is very important when you're talking about complicated litigation and who can offer important testimony. The Florida legislature a number of years ago enacted a reform to have Florida mirror the federal courts, a U.S. Supreme Court decision, but previously the Florida Supreme Court had rejected that because basically it just didn't think that it belonged there and it was their prerogative. Last year, your state Supreme Court, on its own motion, with new membership, adopted that important reform. That's very significant.
One of your concerns are data privacy lawsuits. What is that?
Well, this is an important area. This is an example of what we would call sort of an entrepreneurial area of the law. A lot of states are looking at legislation to deal with data privacy, social media platforms, and personal information used in that respect, and which is important. It's an important policy issue. But we're also seeing litigation sort of creep in, private rights of action. In other words, lawyers being able to bring lawsuits arising out of these statutes. For example, in Illinois, they passed a law, and the courts have interpreted that law to allow litigation. You don't even have to prove that there's been an injury. You don't even have to prove that you've suffered a loss.
Wow.
And that's an example of that sort of entrepreneurial litigation that we think is a problem. This area, we think, is going to give rise to a lot of litigation. We think that's going to be a problem.
Do you know, one of the things you're bringing to mind is that on the ballot, there's usually a list of judges, and we're asked as voters, do we want to keep them in office? And to be honest, most of us don't know. We don't know who these. I don't know the judge. I mean, unless you've gone to court for something, right? But it sounds like this is one of the most important votes on the ballot, or as important as a congressman or a president, even. Because if they're the ones making decisions about our local courts, they're the ones who we need to think carefully about whether we want them in or not.
Well, I think that's right, and I think there are organizations in Florida that will work maybe to educate the public about, what are the appropriate ways to determine whether someone is a good candidate for the bench. But ultimately, whatever the process is, I think the most important thing is to recognize what you just said, Larry, which is that it is important. That you can't just sort of gloss over it. You need to be thoughtful and seek out information about the people you're voting for.
The website is judicialhellholes, plural, right? .com?
.org.
I'm sorry, .org, and I did find it online, and in fact, I have their logo on the streaming video right now. Tiger, there are so many more questions we probably have. Are the answers probably on the website?
A lot of information there, but anybody that wants to reach us, we would welcome hearing from them. Contact us through the website or through the American Tort Reform Association at www.atra.org.
Okay, very good. That's good information. Well, I'm going to look into this, Tiger. Thank you for sharing this with us.
Thank you both, Larry and Robin, for having me on.
You're absolutely welcome. We'll be right back.
You know, Christmas is getting close fast, and WOC